Good morning, everyone, or evening or afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you guys for joining us today for this 30 West IP update. Today is, let's see if I can remind myself, November 9, 2021. So this information might have changed if you're viewing this much later. So again, thank you guys for joining us today for our discussion on some upcoming changes to some oceanic operations, as we're calling this one, the future of oceanic operations. Before we get started, I do want to kind of go through some standard house cleaning type information for you. We will have you guys muted on the microphones simply because of the number of folks who are in attendance today. However, we are asking for questions, so use the questions pane to send us your questions. We would prefer that you send us the questions there, and then we'll attempt to answer them as we go. And we'll certainly try to answer all of them at the end in the Q&A. If we can't answer some of these, then hopefully there is somebody with expertise in the group today that might be able to chime in and throw out some answers for us. You do have my telephone number right there. In the event that you have some sort of technical issue and you want to let me know about it, I can try to help you to get back on, but do keep in mind I am not a technical wizard by any means. So with that being said, I'll let you copy that number if you need to, and you can certainly give me a call if you need help on it. But just keep in mind, I have very limited technical skills to get your computer back up and running. All right. Mitch, we do appear to have automatic timing on this thing running right now, so be careful on that one. And I will turn it over to Mitch, and Mitch will talk to us about some of the oceanic changes on the horizon.
Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
This is one of my favorite topics. I like talking about oceanic opposite, and I particularly like talking about the future and what the future holds and what we see coming down the line. And sometimes we get asked, how do you find this stuff out? Where's this information lie? And in the spirit of collaboration, we're going to open this up with and begin with a look at where you can find this information and at no cost. And not only can you find this information at a couple of consolidated sites, but they'll actually show you in the sites what to emphasize, what's really important and changing. So it's always nice to start with the idea of, you feed a man a fish for a day, but if you teach him how to fish, he can, feed himself. We want you to be able to find this information. So Joe and I are going to turn our cameras off just for the purposes of bandwidth, and then we're going to move into the presentation. So let me gather my tools together, and here we'll begin. This is our website, and again, it's not by any means an attempt to sell anything. I just want to show you where to find this information in a real easy manner. 30westip.com. Over here in the resources tab, Joe and I are constantly working to try to make sure this is the most value we can provide to you and to us, because we use it to find information. And we take a look at it and break it out by agency. This seems to be an easy way for us to find stuff. And I want to show you some stuff under the FAA tab. If I go to the FAA tab, there's some resources right down here. The FAA Nat Resource, Pacific Resource, Waters Resource. Many of you have seen these before. We've talked about them in other presentations, but they've been updated, and there's some changes that have occurred to make them even more valuable and easy to use. This is where a lot of times we go to find out how things are advancing and what programs are underway. Up here, they've added a search function so that it's easier to find information. What isn't new is this section over here, and the section over here talks about airspace and CNS. You hear us talk about that in training a lot. And then it has an area that emphasizes the up and coming changes or the topics that are truly important. And that's what I was mentioning just a moment ago. It's available for free. It offers us great insights. Here, they added a contents. This is new. So you can find something that specifically addresses what it is that you might be interested in and be able to locate it. There's also a waters guide, and that name may possibly change here in the near future, and it offers information about that region that's very helpful as well. So this is just, again, in the spirit of collaboration. It's much better for you to know how to find stuff. We try to make it easy to find stuff through our website, I will say the FAA has updated their website, and as they so often do, I don't know that made it easier for people like us. So we just put hyperlinks in ours. As we begin the talk about the future of oceanic ops, I want to express a word of caution. I don't want anyone to listen to what we're talking about right here in this moment this morning and think that these implementations are currently in effect. We're going to talk about the future. I enjoy that. When we talk in class, we don't talk about the future. We talk about the current implementations. So it's a real refreshing change for us to be able to look down the road and look at some of the very hopeful and optimistic bright futures that we think are being opened up by technology. Again, these implementations are currently not in effect. So I'm going to break out our discussion by talking about North Atlantic changes and then Pacific changes. There's some important things going on in the Pacific, and then a little bit about a couple of emerging technologies. And that's what I'm really excited about. And I love technologies, and I like to look down the road and see where things are going to be implemented that will improve the safety of the environment. I am going to use this document. This is a summary of the North Atlantic Systems Planning Group meeting that took place in June, and it gives us some really great information. It allows me to speak to something without being the authority. You know, I'm going to reference this so we can all see what they're talking about. And getting this document is really not that hard. Again, I go back to the NAT resource guide. I go to the emphasis items. And remember, I said the emphasis items are important stuff. And then down here on the lower right-hand side, I'm not real smart. So they got a red box. So a red box usually tells me that's important stuff, right? And I like this word here, free. I love that. So I want to look at the NAT SPG reports. And I can do it by clicking that hyperlink right there. And that'll take you to the reports. And I merely selected the most recent report. So I'm not clever. I'm just using the tools that are provided to us for free by the FAA, and we'd encourage you to do the same thing. This is something that as soon as I saw it, I realized I'd really like to do a webcast about that. We already had a couple things lined up with some other technologies and guest speakers, so we're finally getting to it. And this is the North Atlantic 2030 vision and where they see things going. So there is no reason for us to assume that this will happen, because it might not, but this is what they foresee down the road. And there's a host of things, and I'm not going to talk about them all, but I'm just going to hit upon a few, the things that us as business aviation operators would find interesting. And the first one here is something that's been going on for a while: the effort to discontinue oceanic clearances in the North Atlantic. When you create change in the North Atlantic, usually it becomes a discussion item at the NAT SPG or at one of the subgroups, and then they will assign a committee to look at it, and then finally a working group to see how it would fit. And they're well along in that process with this, and we're going to talk just a little bit about it. I don't know, I can't tell you exactly how it looks, but I have read the details of some of the minutes from the subcommittees and what they're looking at. Based on conversations in oceanic working groups that Joe and I have attended, it appears that approximately 98% of the flights in the North Atlantic do not require a reclearance. And many of us, although we've had a reclearance, have on routine flights gotten exactly what we filed. The 2% with a conflict would still get a reclearance under this scenario. Reclearances wouldn't not happen, they would continue to happen, but why would you inconvenience the 98% who are going to get what they filed? Think, if you will, of the North Atlantic clearance system that's used in New York Center. You get your route clearance on the ground, you confirm your altitude and your Mach number as you enter, and then if there's a problem, they give you a reclearance. I think it's going to be modeled after that. And like the New York clearance procedure, you would just utilize the route that's provided at your departure airport. We believe that they would probably want to require you to verify flight level Mach number at entry. We don't know that for a fact, but that seems to be consistent with their concerns about large height deviations. And, we did a presentation at the base about errors, and large height deviations in the North Atlantic are the largest type of error that they have. So they want to confirm the flight level, I'm sure. Ideally, they would implement this technology that would allow us to do push-to-load flight plans and work on a new route. And Joe and I did a presentation with the NBA on that last year, the push-to-load technology. It's just not ready for prime time, and they may not wait for that because many of you have airplanes that will accept a push-to-load flight plan, but they need to send the change in a push-to-load in the center prior to your entering Oceanic airspace, i.e., if Gander Oceanic is going to give you a reroute, it would have to be sent to you in a push-to-load by Gander Domestic. If Shanwick was going to give you a reroute, it would have to be sent to you by Scottish or Irish, the Shannon system. And the way the technology works right now, they can't do that. It can only be done by the center that you're operating from. So there are some restrictions there, but ideally that would be the way to solve it. But they've just got some barriers to that. And apparently I would hope that they're not going to wait for that. So the first thing that we wanted to talk about was the oceanic clearance. It's unique to the North Atlantic. It will continue to be important, and there will continue to be reroutes, but it would certainly make all of our lives a little easier if what we had filed was what we're going to get, and we didn't have to read it back. Next thing on the matrix is they're considering, and this is just a consider, so this is pretty far down in, I think, the pecking order. I've seen it written about for a couple of years. Considering RVSM above flight level 410. I've seen it suggested it would go to 4.3. I've seen it suggested it would go to 4.5. I don't think anybody really knows what will happen with this, but it's a common topic. While this seems like a real smart move, it would allow, primarily they're doing it because they're having 787s and Airbus 380s that can operate with passengers on board at 430, and it would give them an extra flight level. They could use 42 and 430. So the negative impact, though, is something that we want to talk about right here, because our airplanes, and this is just an example of something from the flight manual of our airplane. This is an example of the flight envelope for RVSM. My airplanes only approve for RVSM to 410, not above. And I'm willing to bet that none of your airplanes are approved for RVSM above flight level 410. They might be capable of being recertified for operations at 4.3 or 4.5, but that's not a given. And anybody who was in the industry when RVSM in the North Atlantic was implemented, which I believe was 1997, there are a lot of surprises when you start trying to operate with that accuracy at higher altitudes. And the unintended consequence of raising the RVSM level to 450 would be that aircraft that perhaps you and the department I flew with would be able to routinely operate at 4.3 and 4.5 would be restricted to 410 and below until the airplanes were recertified. So there could be a very negative impact if they were to try to implement this as they're discussing by 2023. That's a pretty near timeline. We really want to see the airplanes recertified before they implement it. And I'm willing to bet that just like in 1997, it would be unique to the North Atlantic, and it wouldn't be at the top of the list of the aircraft manufacturers right off the bat because, it's a regional implementation. So that's a little bit about expanding the RVSM envelope. Returning to the matrix, the next topic is one that we're going to talk about in emerging topics, and that is communication system resilience based on space-based VHF. Now, I'm excited about this. I think this is a really exciting goal. It's not very far along in its development, but we'll talk about that separately in here in just a moment. And then the NAT contingency procedures would be continually reviewed every spring. Now, I don't believe that that's a good news story. I believe that when you change the contingency procedures, particularly specifically for a region, and they're not consistent around the world, that you create the opportunity for them to be confused and incorrectly executed. In fact, as we talked about at the base when we did our presentation on errors, 2 of the top 10 oceanic errors last year were incorrectly executed contingency procedures and incorrectly executed weather contingency procedures. So we would really want to continue to be very aggressive at training and talking about what that means. And I would hope that they would be slow to change the contingency procedures, or honestly, to do anything that would require them to change the contingency procedures without a lot of thought. Now, this North Atlantic Operations Bulletin talks about PBCS operations. And in training, we've talked about this for some time. And the reason that it came out in a bulletin was that it was part of a trial program for performance-based communication and separation. Originally, it was in a bulletin that called it RLAT-SM, and it evolved into this. Now, often the advances in technology are first trialed in the North Atlantic. They like that role. And the technology then gets adopted by ICAO, and that's what's happened. ICAO has created standards for PBCS, and they're embodied in Doc 4444 and a PBCS manual. And then it's up to the regions to decide how to implement them. So here's what Shanwick says in the UK AIP. It says, okay, we've got PBCS organized tracks, and they require RC P240, RNP4, and RSP 180. So ICAO created the standard now. It's not a trial program, and then it's implemented in an AIP. Now, what that means is, since it's no longer a trial program, it's not restricted to the North Atlantic. And what we're going to see when we talk about the Pacific is the expansion of PBCS into the Pacific in the coming months. I want to remind you that in the North Atlantic today, they only assign PBCS to tracks when the tracks are in effect and between 3.5 and 3.9. And there are days there are no PBCS tracks, and there's days that there are, 3, 5, 6, some days, more than that. But not every day has PBCS tracks, and every track message identifies that. And now that that is embodied in Doc 4444 with the most recent change 9, we're going to see that it can be used in other places around the world, and they're going to rescind that bulletin. And that's going to give the North Atlantic more opportunities. Since it's not a trial, they can use it in more ways than they've done in the past. Now, this is a copy of the approval of Amendment 9. And it says something that I think is beneficial to us all. They published this on 19 May 2020, and then it is applicable 5 November 2020. And we did a webcast on the changes in this manual for that date on contingency procedures. We try to do webcasts when significant changes occur to this manual. The reason that it was first released on 19 May is that gives the intermediate time between 19 May and 5 November, every country around, every state around the globe should respond in the AIP and say, okay, we're going to embrace this and incorporate it in our AIP, or we're going to put it in a exception, which would be in General 1.7, and then in General 1.7 the AIP, they'd say, we don't implement, let's say, contingency procedures in accordance with ICAO Doc 4444. Our differences are, and then they highlight those differences. So this period of time between here is when they can go in and fix their AIPs. And sometimes, we had some questions about this when it came to contingency procedures, a country will just neglect it, not put it into the AIP, and not put a change in, which is never the intended purpose. So there were some FIRs out in oceanic airspace that appeared to have the old contingency procedures, but in fact, what they'd done is they had just not correctly identified it in the AIP. And because they didn't put a difference in General 1.7, without that difference, they were automatically utilizing that implementation. They needed to put a difference in if they weren't going to do it. So if you went in and saw that their latest contingency procedure discussion was from 2012, then that's just an out-of-date AIP. This embodied the PBCS standards. The PBCS standards, as you see here, were placed into a PBCS document and Doc 4444, and they created separation standards. I'm not going to go through all these separation standards. My mere point here is that it was created at the ICAO level as an official separation standard, and that is how they're going to be able to use it to expand operations for PBCS in the North Atlantic and in the Pacific. It's no longer a trial program. So as a result of this, this bulletin that I showed you, we believe will very soon be eliminated, and it will no longer be part of the NatOps bulletin library. In fact, from the minutes of the meeting, we can tell that there's an attempt to reduce the number of bulletins in the NatOps library so that they can, emphasize the importance of the ones that do exist. Now, as this approaches its sunset in February of this year, this bulletin, which talks about waypoints and emphasis items for operating in the North Atlantic, they added a very important sentence, and it said, oceanic clearances containing a reroute issued by voice, VHF, or OCL, which is ACARS, your Oceanic Clearance Request System through ACARS, may include half-degree waypoints. Now, prior to February 2021, in the trial program, this was not permitted. But once it was embodied in the ICAO standard, they expanded it to allow the controllers to send you reroutes with half-degree waypoints. And then the next sentence talks about how important it is for the crew and for people in the training business to ensure that they work diligently to mitigate any errors with half-degree waypoints. And of course, we work very diligently at that every time we train a crew. We talk about that. We quiz people on their knowledge about that. So it's real important that we work with and understand the capabilities of PBCS and how they're represented in waypoint coding and where we could encounter them. The next thing I want to mention is we had some questions about this, so we emailed Shanwick. And by the way, I don't have any friends at Shanwick. I wish I did. I went into the Net Resource Guide, and in the back of it, it gave us contact information, and it had a guy in Shanwick with a contact email, and I sent him an email. So back to the resource guide being very, very useful. And said, could you tell us a little bit more about this? And he says, yeah, right now, if you're outside the organized track, you can file half-degree waypoints, and you can mix half and whole degree waypoints, and we'll let you do anything you want anywhere outside, including at higher altitudes that the business aviation community might fly. I found that frightening. We don't generally advertise that, but we are prepared to talk about it. It's just a reality all of us should be prepared to be familiar with. So to kind of summarize the discussions that we had via email with Shanwick, half-degree waypoints may now be filed on random routes outside the organized track. I have no idea why that would be beneficial. I think it would create confusion, but it is a reality. Outside the organized track system, half-degree waypoints can be mixed and alternated with whole-degree waypoints. I find that frightening. Outside the organized track system, half-degree waypoints may be filed at any flight level along a random route. So you could file it and get it at 43 or 45, or you could file whole degrees at 43 and 45 and get a reroute that would include half degrees. Possibly unlikely, but that capability is out there. Once the bulletin is retracted, this flexibility will be available within the organized track system as designated in the daily track message. So the gist of the email we got from Shanwick was, once they pull that bulletin back and there's no longer a trial program and that bulletin doesn't constrain how they operate, you may see a track message that implements half-degree waypoints in different manners outside of the 3.5 to 3.9 limitation. So we do anticipate more information on that in the very, very near future. And if that does occur, we'll have a webcast and talk about that. But that's on the radar for changes in the North Atlantic. Now, moving from the North Atlantic to the Pacific has some very interesting changes, and they're a direct result of the changes in Doc 4444 for PBCS as well. The Pacific Resource Guide right here can provide information. It doesn't currently address the topic that I'm going to talk about. The topic that I'm going to talk about came from a meeting that Joe and I attended. A lot of times Joe and I will attend meetings that are open, and we have no role. We're like, if you can imagine, they're virtual now, but if they were to take place in a room, we would be in the seats against the wall and not participating. We would just be taking notes and feel very fortunate to be there. But it will be in here, we believe, 7 days before the actual implementation, which is 2 December next month, 27 days from now. But we do get questions about the Pacific, and I flew the Pacific and enjoy the Pacific. There's a lot of great stuff in here about links, and some of these groups are the groups that Joe and I try to sit in on, to try to just be a fly on the wall and listen to what's going on. And you can go in and get information about the meetings. And then here it gives you a direct link to a lot of the AIPs that are associated with operations in that region as well. So that's another great resource. So just trying to be consistent and refer to how we would approach this when we're trying to look for information about a region. But now going back to the Pacific, the first thing that I want to address specifically is a NOPAC route system redesign. The NOPAC has not changed in decades. I know that because I'm an old guy and I've been flying it for a really long time. It was originally very concerning to the operators, the proximity to Russia. So if they wanted to get the routes as close to Russia without, putting us in jeopardy at crossing into Russian airspace. So this right here shows the future of the NOPAC system, and we're not going to get to the NOPAC future on 2 December, but we're going to start, and there's going to be some important changes that start on 2 December. Now, right now, what we see is there are 5 routes that are the principal routes that cross the North Pacific, and these routes are based on designs from years gone by, and they actually literally sit, Romeo 220 up here literally sits too close to the Russian boundary for proper spacing. So they need to move them. So up here's the yellow. The yellow is what exists today. So they're literally going to move all of the routes south and a little east and west while they go south, about 8 miles, approximately 8 miles, to be able to create not only proper separation for Russia, but then to optimize the separation from the redesigned routes. Now, each of these routes has alphabetical consistency along the waypoints, and there's some really neat stuff that we talk about in training, that this is a very, very well-designed system. But these waypoints are going to move on 2 December 2021. And if I count right, that's, I think, 27 days from today. They will appear approximately a week prior in a NOTAM, and I'll show you where you can find that NOTAM, and we'll be tracking that. The information about this is available through a public digest. It's called the National Flight Data Digest, and it's another open source document. And here they talk about what they're doing. They're going to take Nippy intersection and they're going to move it. So here is the old coordinates and here's the new coordinates. And it goes right down through all the waypoints on what would be Romeo 220. And it details in a public digest what they intend to do as they move that. So it'll keep the same names and it will keep the same routes initially. This is also conveniently the date that they reissue a map. And I suspect that this map that will be reissued for the NOPAC will be available approximately a week before the change as well. So we'll be adding that to our courseware. If you operate with ForeFlight, you'll be able to pull that up into ForeFlight once it becomes effective on 2 December. You just download the new charts. So that is the movement of the track system approximately 8 miles south to establish consistent separation and proper clearance from the Russian boundary. But it goes beyond that. That's just the first part. What will occur on 2 December 2021 is the northern route, Romeo 220, will require PBCS from flight level 340 to flight level 400 inclusive. That's not the same as the North Atlantic trial program. The North Atlantic trial program was 35 to 39 inclusive. This is a little broader. I like standardization. We didn't see this executed with standardization. So as of 2 December 2021, they want you to have PBCS to operate in that airspace. We have been informed by the folks there that they won't penalize people who violate it, but they don't want you to violate it. They're going to run it for a year, and they're going to get data during that year to try to ensure that they get compliance. And if somebody's not compliant, i.e. their LOA or their op spec doesn't approve them for that, then they're going to send them a letter and say, don't fly in that airspace until you get approved. Now, if you think that's difficult, it's not. There's this wonderful tool called computers, and a computer can look at the filing codes of an airplane and compare it, if it's a US airplane, to the LOAs that they have on file. We've seen this done in the past. So you would want to be very careful about that. We don't want to fly in airspace that we're not approved for. Again, this will be implemented, this PBCS requirement will be implemented by NOTAM, and we anticipate it based on emails with the agency to occur on 2 December 2021. And PBCS, as described by the FAA, has separation standards that are ever so slightly different than it would be in the North Atlantic. It's insignificant in terms of an operator, but it's reduced separation, and it would require an RNP4 approval and a BO36, and then your Alpha 056 would have to have RCP 240 and RSP 180. So this is going to be the most immediate. There are some additional changes. They're going to add a route between Romeo 220 and Romeo 580, and PBCS won't be required on Romeo 580 on phase 1. But they're going to publish Mike 523, a new route, and that route, when it is put into effect by NOTAM, which we believe will be a year from now. So it'll be published and you'll probably be able to see it. We do anticipate you'll be able to see it. It just won't be in use for probably about a year. That would be PBCS 340 to 400. And then below 340, you would not be able to fly that route, nor above it would you be able to fly it. So it's a little bit different implementation. I don't have to guess at this. Again, going back to the National Flight Data Digest, they published it. And I was curious. I thought, oh my gosh, I hope they don't use AirRank 424 coding. Anybody who's worked with us understands how concerning we are about AirRank 424 coding and its proper use. They did something quite wise. They decided to use alphabetically consistent 5-digit computer-generated names, and these will all have H. Now that's pretty clever. H for half. So I like what they did here. We believe the route will appear on the map, but will not be active until implemented by NOTAM. We won't know until the map is produced. They're also going to create a route down south of Romeo 580 that will be November 507, and it will have the same properties as Mike 523. It, we believe as well, will be published on the map. Right here, all these waypoints start with R, and they all have named waypoints. So it's not a guessing game about how this is going to happen. It's already been published and made available. It's just a matter of how it will be reflected on the maps and how it will be implemented by NOTAMs. So when it comes to NOTAMs, NOTAMs is a topic that gets a lot of attention. The ops group guys love to talk about NOTAMs. But one of the principal things we want to point out is there are different kinds of NOTAMs. And, you know, if you just go in and do a regular NOTAM search, you're not going to get what we call the International Oceanic Airspace Notices, these NOTAMs. These NOTAMs are available in a different location. And these are kind of, I'll take a little license here, these are kind of like the FAA's version of a North Atlantic Operations Bulletin. They're different and they're more expansive. They're written in plain English. I'm a big admirer of these. We've talked about them in previous webcasts. Often, if it's the North Atlantic and it affects New York Oceanic, it'll repeat verbiage that's in a North Atlantic bulletin. With the redesign of the FAA website, it was challenging for me to find some of this stuff. And of course, we had to fix the hyperlinks on our website. So I would suggest that as you want to keep abreast of what's going on with this International Oceanic NOTAM site, that perhaps you just go to our website, select resources, go to FAA, and then here we have the International NOTAM website and the Oceanic plotting charts, which is they call them planning. These charts are the ones I showed you. It'll take you right to the page where you can download those. And then another thing that we talk a lot about in initial and various recurrences, the prohibited and restricted airspace associated with operations around the world. So in the spirit of trying to make it easy, you might find it easier to go there. So that's a little bit about the Pacific. We talked about the North Atlantic and the Pacific. What I'd like to do is to conclude this by talking about a couple emerging technologies, and they bring a lot of hope to the future. They're technologies in the first instance that you're no doubt familiar with because we've talked about it in webcasts and in training at the IOC and various times. This is space-based ADS-B. It's currently employed by a company called Arion, and it is available around the world, and it is used differently in various phases of operation. You know, we don't use it domestically in the United States because we have a ground-based system, but it still tracks airplanes in the United States. It can be used in remote areas like Edmonton up to the North Pole. It's used for surveillance, and that's incredible. It's used in a second part of Africa, and that's really an incredible improvement in safety. And it's currently used for reduced separation in Gander and Shanwick, and that is outlined in this bulletin called ACEPS. And it talks about space-based ADS-B and reduced separation if you have basically PBCS plus ADS-B. Now, this is only used for reduced separation currently, to my knowledge, in Shanwick and Gander, but like we saw with the PBCS, this bulletin has already been rescinded, and this program called ACEPS is no longer referred to as ACEPS. It's increasingly important, but they have no longer called. The ACEPS was the North Atlantic name for it, and the ICAO didn't adopt that. So with that change, Amendment 9 to the Doc 4444, they created separation standards, and it was all about using real-time surveillance where VHF voice communication is not available. ICAO doesn't call this ACEPS. To be able to get a clue as to what they're calling it, I'm going to go to the minutes of another meeting called the North Atlantic Technology and Interoperability Group, the TIG. And in the TIG, they talk about space-based data, technology is space-based ADS-B. They talk about it here. And the group was provided an update by the FAA on trials related to the evaluation of space-based ADS-B. So the term that we're seeing used now is not ACEPS, it's SBA. SBA would be space-based ADS-B. So we can kind of set aside ACEPS, and we can kind of acknowledge that this could be used anywhere in the world because it's now in Doc 4444. It's no longer a trial in the North Atlantic. And I think we could be encouraged by the fact that the FAA has set up a trial program to use it in various environments. And those environments include Anchorage, Oakland, and New York Oceanic. I'm personally excited about this. The FAA, however, was unable to use space-based ADS-B data operationally in their initial efforts in the Caribbean. And that shocked me. And we have actually been following this for about 6 or 8 months. There were problems, and it consistently worked extremely well in Gander and Shanwick, but it didn't work in the Caribbean. And the answer lies here. It was noted that because a number of aircraft experiencing detection issues, meaning space-based ADS-B couldn't see them, due to single antenna installations. Well, if you fly in Europe, you're required to have what's called an enhanced Mode S transponder, where the US simply uses Mode S transponders. And the Mode S transponder standard for implementation, the TSO, the US doesn't require antenna diversity. And a lot of airplanes only have a transponder antenna on the bottom of the airplane, and that's the antenna the ADS-B uses. They use the transponder and the antenna. They both use 1090 megahertz. The Europeans require antenna diversity. So if you're in an airplane that flies to Europe and you comply with the enhanced Mode S transponder requirements, then you're going to have an antenna on the top and the bottom. And that explains why operating in Shanwick and Gander, you're going to have excellent results. But when you're in an airplane that doesn't go to Europe, and think of the airlines now, the airlines have large numbers of airplanes that go to South America, the Caribbean, and to the Pacific. And many of these airplanes, just like many of the small airplanes, don't have an antenna on the top. And therefore, they don't work well with space-based ADS-B. And that's a problem that's got to be resolved. And I don't know the solution to it. Perhaps the US would require antenna diversity. But I don't know how you get there from here. It's outside the scope of what I do. But I was saddened to see that the fact that we hadn't adopted enhanced Mode S transponders was possibly going to have a negative impact in the space-based ADS-B expansion. But space-based ADS-B is the future. Clearly, it's going to be a huge advantage as we move into oceanic ops in the coming decades. The next emerging technology has to do with communication, and it's actually tied pretty closely with space-based ADS-B. What I'm going to show you here, I kind of took this and smoothed it out. It's a working card from an ICAO committee, and I took some of the details out of it and used something that I did not change a single word in it, but I took some of the descriptions out to sanitize it. This is talking about the improvement of long-range voice communications, and we, not too long ago, had a webcast on that. And the problem statements, I'll read you. I don't like to read you, but I think it's important. The current long-range voice communications do not provide the robustness and the reliability required to enable safer application of advanced ATM operations, i.e. reduced separation. They don't feel that the current voice systems support reducing separation beyond a certain point, and they go on to qualify that in airspace where ground-based services are not available, oceanic and remote. So that's the problem. We don't have quick enough. We don't have, a real-time voice in oceanic areas like you would with VHF. They go into the details. The implementation of enhanced surveillance capability, i.e. space-based ADS-B, which we just spoke of, is calling for improved communication capability for further advancement in oceanic and remote airspace, i.e. you can see me in real time, but you can't talk to me in real time. I don't get the full benefit of that being able to see me in real time without being able to communicate in real time. And they go on to specifically state that CPDLC does not provide instantaneous intervention capability, i.e. push to talk as you would have with VHF. So they can't call you on CPDLC and say, turn right immediately to 270 and descend to flight level 400. You've got traffic at 12 o'clock converging. The CPDLC isn't fast enough to make that effective. I think anybody who's used it would agree. What they need is a more reliable, a more robust voice communication capability, and it is needed as a backup for CPDLC for emergency and non-routine use. So ideally, in oceanic areas, you'd still use CPDLC like you do it in Canada, where the Canadians can send you frequency changes and changes to your clearance, but your immediate issues having to do with safety of airspace can be done on VHF. Here's what they're proposing as an amendment to Doc 4444. We talk about Doc 4444 a lot. I know we do. They're talking about, in the coming change, adding a new term, and that is direct controller pilot communications. Now, DPCP or DCPC, I got it wrong. DCPC is the acronym of the day. I can recall when I first heard CPDLC, and that certainly didn't roll off our tongue. I think a better term for that would have been Datacom. This DCPC is the future. This is where you can intervene immediately and ask somebody to turn or decline to avoid a collision, to ask somebody to respond if they have to execute a contingency procedure. So how are we going to accomplish DCPC in the future? And remember, these are proposals. This one is like in its earliest stages, but it's one of the most encouraging. Space-based VHF. And I talked about that when I looked at the Vision 2030 for the North Atlantic. I talked and said I would come back and talk about space-based VHF. Well, a study was done on space-based VHF by Singapore. Singapore in 2019 contracted with a private company to place very low Earth orbit satellites out over their airspace, and then to use that to expand their VHF coverage. And they're encouraged by the results of that. I mean, nobody's ready to say they're done. Nobody's ready to say this is absolutely what it is. But the image that I show you here is from an ICAO document, not a magazine article. You know, this isn't a journal. This is actually out of an ICAO document that describes what they're doing in Singapore. So SBV may provide the solution. SBA, space-based ADS-B, and SBV may change the face of how we operate in oceanic airspace in the future. Now, the Europeans have created a test project for space-based VHF, and we can see it described here. They want to demonstrate the traffic in remote areas can communicate with space-based VHF in order to be able to improve their handling of it. Now you can see the start date here was 1 January 2021. It's a 2-year program. It's been fully funded. And I love to see people invest in the future. The Europeans do a great job of investing in the future. So we're encouraged by this. And as I wrap this up, let me just suggest that could we imagine a future where we have worldwide real-time surveillance? And the impact on that, I don't care about separation. I don't care about capacity. The impact of that on safety would be profound. And we already have the technology for that. So if we could imagine combining it with worldwide real-time space-based VHF, it would change the way we do all oceanic and remote operations, which is, of course, the subject of this webcast. So there's a bright future out there. We're encouraged by it. And we just wanted to kind of share what we saw here. This is a fun thing for us because we typically don't talk about the future. So I will conclude by saying these are future implementations. They don't exist today. And I'm pretty sure everybody can handle that. But these are things that you won't be looking for in the next few days, or in some cases, the next few years. Now, having said that, what we'll do is we'll open up the conversation for questions. We always enjoy this period because when we introduce a topic like this, you guys think of more stuff than Joe and I ever could. So I got a pad
Absolutely.
and paper, and I'm going to be taking notes. And the stuff that the questions that you ask are going to be very important to us. So, Joe, would you like to start with the questions
Sure.
while I get a fresh piece of paper?
Absolutely. And, I also want to say that if a question is asked and we don't have an answer and somebody in the group does, please let us know that. I'll start off with just a hello for you. Mitch from John Cox wanted to tell you hello. And that was the first question comment that we had for you. So there you go.
John's from my hometown. And
okay. Awesome.
I was up there training a few years ago, and he was very generous, and we had a good time.
Good deal. Welcome, John. Lucas is asking, do you know anything about, is the 787 certified for RVSM above 410?
I don't know that. I
Me
was
either.
told by a controller in Oakland when I was observing in the Oceanic sector that they had seen them operating with passengers at 430. And I was quite surprised. So I don't know anything about the 787, but I suspect somebody out there does. So perhaps we'll be able to get an answer.
Yeah, and if anybody has an answer, send it into the questions panel if you like, or let us know one way or another. All right. Cyril is asking, please confirm that the half-degree track outside of the organized tracks. Well, I think what you mean is the half-degree route outside of the organized tracks is still only for PBCS approved operators.
Boy, Cyril, that's a great observation. Absolutely, you are correct, and I should have said that. When they give you reroutes with half-degree waypoints, it would only be done when you have properly filed that you are capable of all full PBCS operations. Remember, how you file is your contract with ATC, and that's a great point. And it illustrates how important it is for us to listen to you, because if I talk about this again, I'll have to mention that.
Steve, hello, Steve. Steve's asking if you guys know, or if anybody in the group knows, he's having a hard time finding the paper version of the Jeppesen North Atlantic orientation chart. Anybody able to find a place to buy that?
I have bought them from Jeppesen in the past. I emailed Jeppesen this morning, so Steve, I will get back to you with an answer on that. In correspondence with Jeppesen in a moment. Joe and I are trying to renew our license agreement. So, and we purchase orientation charts and plotting charts in bulk because we're old and we still use paper. I love electronic plotting, and I love what Sean Scott's doing and what PlotNG are doing, and I think that's an incredible future. But I still have paper charts that I hand out in class when we are live.
Excellent. Yeah, Steve. Hopefully we'll find Steve saying he can't find it on their website, and hopefully when we have our conversation with our new JEP rep, we'll find a place to purchase it. Chris is indicating that he has purchased the North Atlantic orientation chart within the past month directly from Jeppesen. So there's one that was able to get it and one that was not able to get it on the Jeppesen website.
Yeah, I call them on the phone and talk to them when I order charts, and they hate it. And then I ask them a simple question: where would I find this chart on your website? And then they look it up and they come back and I go, it's not on the website. So I do know that has been a problem for us in the past.
Robert is asking, is there any update on whether KA band will be required someday?
Perhaps somebody would know the answer. I don't.
Apologize, Robert. I don't know that answer either. And hopefully we have somebody with expert knowledge in the field that can.
I think if it were to envision, what they would do is they would set up a performance standard for what the KA band can produce, in terms of RCP and RSP. And then that performance standard would be implemented, and then anything that could operate at that bandwidth would be able to satisfy it. They don't want to endorse a product per se, but there perhaps would be someone who knows better than I.
Excellent. Paul's asking, do you foresee any changes or improvements, aka improvements, to the FAA LOA process as a result of these expected changes?
I think we've already seen that. I know that personally some of you haven't experienced that, but Joe and I have been, that fly on the wall on the LOA streamlining process. And just literally in the past 2 weeks, the fact that we submitted and participated in that process, and we're what's called a TSOC approved training statement of compliance, as is Sean Scott. He's TSOC approved, flight safety. We would get questions from people and they would say, well, my FSDO doesn't know if you're okay. And now we can just send the TSOC and say, yeah, we've been vetted by Washington and we're okay. And they're accepting ASOCs from the aircraft manufacturers. Yesterday, we were working with a crew who is in the process of taking delivery of a new Gulfstream 500. and they were unfamiliar with the ASOC, PSOC, and TSOC, but they had gone to all the vendors who participated. So it is improving things. It's doing it. It did it yesterday in our conversations with this group. It did it the week before in our conversations with another group. So it's just not happening as fast as everybody would like. It's still in its beta phase, but it's gone beyond its initial, there were originally 3 operators in the first phase of beta, and now they're expanding beyond that. There may be, again, somebody in the group who would have something to add to that.
And if you do, feel free to add in. This is a good observation, Martin. I wish I knew how to do that too. Martin's asking, how can we stop ourselves from getting older so we can live long enough to see all these great changes? Yeah, no kidding. All right.
The only solution to stop us from getting older is death.
And you won't be able to see it then. John is asking if we know anything about space-based VHF range limitations or problems on frequency spacing issues.
No, those are being sorted out in Singapore as we speak, and will no doubt be challenging for the Europeans as well. So I think we haven't even gotten the nose under the tent. The camel's nose isn't even under the tent on that yet. They're limited in range because they are very, very low satellites. I do know that from reading about what this folks in Singapore decided to do.
Okay. Jeff is asking, or he's making a comment and a question here. When flying to Japan, he says we're always routed into the Russian airspace north of Petra. Will this change after September 21?
No, nothing like that will change. I will say this, going north through Petro can be literally shorter, but I've run a lot of routes and sometimes the shorter is 60 to 80 miles, 10 minutes. It can sometimes benefit from improved wind conditions to go through Petro. But the flight department that I flew with, we flew old people, and they were very important old people. And we didn't go into Russian airspace if we could operate without a real bad penalty, which in a Gulf Stream with a lot of gas wasn't a big deal. We stayed in the NOPAC because if somebody had a medical issue, we felt like we could respond more appropriately in the NOPAC than we could by saving 5 or 10 minutes to go through Russian airspace. So all you got to do is tell UV, hey, we're going to Japan and we want to go in the NOPAC. And that solved that.
Okay. Doug made an observation regarding that RVSM, I think, but he was saying the 787 AFM is limited to 43.1.
Oh, how clever. How exceedingly clever.
Ed, hey, Ed. Ed's asking, any update to the ATNB1 VHF data speed issue? Are they happy with the performance, or are they still looking at potentially scrapping it?
I haven't seen an update. They continue to use it and try to expand it, and it continues to underperform. But thanks for the question, Ed. Ed and I used to fly together, and he is one of the smartest people I've ever met in my whole friggin' life. I'd never get in an argument with Ed.
That's great. Mark is indicating that the weather attenuation characteristics of Ka band would preclude its use for safety services. So thanks for that information, Mark. We appreciate that.
And that was, I think, Thomas, and he's got a link there to YouTube.
Yes, and Thomas asked about where can we get previous webinars, so I sent the link out.
Okay, my apologies. Mark said, yeah, so that is Mark. And Mark
Doug is asking.
I would defer to Mark in that because he's working in the technology as a pilot.
Okay, and Mark indicates, he says he should have said might preclude instead of would preclude. So the attenuation characteristics might preclude the Ka band for safety services.
And that's what is one of the things that's plaguing SAT voice. We talk about SAT voice and the role of SAT voice in the future, and there are a lot of things plaguing it, but one of them is that very same issue.
Yeah. Doug, good question. Thank you. Will the other new airways in the NOPAC require the PBCS or just the Romeo 220?
It will be rolled out. Let me go back and pull the slide up. It'll be rolled out incrementally. And as you can see here, eventually all of them would require PBCS. That wouldn't keep you from flying on Romeo 220 or 580 at higher altitude, but you wouldn't be able to fly on Mike 523 or Mike November 507 at higher altitude. I don't think that they have exactly decided how they're going to progress in that implementation. And I kind of like that idea. Like, let's try it and see what we see. So yes, they will have reduced separation. The future will show us just what that is.
Okay. Let me see something else. Anything else popped up? I believe that is it. So that's currently all the questions. Those are the currently all the questions we have for you right now, Mitch. So, and we have hit the 1 hour mark. So that was perfect timing.
Any comments, requests? We're here to hear you.
Absolutely. If you guys have, if you guys have any future desires to see something else in an upcoming webcast, certainly let us know. We'll certainly take a look into making that happen.
And I'll have a final request as we get ready to close this. I like doing what we just did, but I do believe that there's a lot of people that have a lot to contribute in this industry. So in the course of the last few months, we've had guest speakers, and that has gotten some criticism. I'm okay with criticism. I've been criticized all my aviation career. But I would like to hear from the group that's here. Does that provide value? I think it provides value to me. I love listening to people from ForeFlight or Jepson or Nat Plot NG or somebody like that. So if you have a comment, just say, hey, we like the guest speakers or we don't, because we'd like to continue doing that, but we don't want to do it at the peril of alienating you, the audiences, which we're trying to serve.
And Lauren replies, yes, guest speakers are great. I like guest speakers, bring them on. Yes, guest speakers, no problem. So I think we're getting some good feedback there.
Okay, that's very encouraging.
Yeah.
I had some feedback that people felt we were trying to help sell a product. And if anybody really knows us, my math skills are so poor, I can't sell anything. I mean, so we're just trying to open a collaborative conversation. And it's hard to thread that needle when you ask somebody from a company to talk about what their product does.
Yeah.
But I think that it's been handled very well by the people that we've had on, and we'd like to continue that. So thank you.
Absolutely. And Thomas says, would love to see if you guys can get operational, e.g. Oceanic ATC folks. Yeah, I would love that too. That would be great if we could.
Yeah,
get some of those folks to come in.
Thomas, we've talked about that, and some of the feedback we get is that they can't represent their agencies, like speakers from the EU and from the FAA can't represent their agencies. And I completely understand that. So they're unable to participate in that capacity. And because I think that's brilliant. I would love that. We would love to have a Shanwick controller on. I would love to have an Oakland controller on. It's hard to thread that needle. Great suggestion, though.
Chris Morris pointed out that streamlining beta test for the LOA streamlining process is nearing the end of the beta test. It should be rolled out after the first of the year. And thank you, everybody. We really appreciate your attendance today. Thank you guys for spending your time with us, and certainly send us any emails or text messages with questions you have or suggestions for future webinars.